Welcome, everyone. In today's Hanger podcast episode, with us, we have Tracy, and I'm very excited for this conversation because we're going to talk about something unique. We're going to talk about working with government and technology. How is technology evolving in government sector and focused on developer experience specifically? Before we get started, Tracy, please introduce yourself.
You betcha. You betcha. Well, hello, and thank you for inviting me. My background is as a software architect and an engineer, a couple of decades at that. Have been doing the whole DevOps thing since before DevOps was DevOps because I needed to deliver working software into production environments. I got picked up with a company called MITRE. They recruited me. And what's unique about MITRE is that they're federally funded research and development corporation. That means they're chartered by Congress. And my job is to be objective. My job is to not compete with industry, but I'm supposed to work to remove the friction between industry and the government to help industry, to help academia better help what the government needs are, as opposed to the government trying to do it themselves. They realized after World War II, they didn't have enough scientists on staff. They didn't have enough technologists. So they had to depend on industry, and they needed somebody that could kind of wrangle both ways. So that's what I do. That's what I do.
That's amazing. So let's just double click a little bit more on how government works from a
Mm-hmm.
development perspective, like software engineering perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understand there are a few organizations which are involved, but also government itself has hundreds of different arms.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a little bit more of overview of how all of this software engineering for government today is structured.
So this is a big conversation. We could take a couple of hours to dive into each one of the different domains. But let's start by just saying we all know how big the government is. We all know about the different kinds of capabilities that the government provides, both on behalf of constituents and to keep itself running. Everything from arming the warfighter to Centers for Disease Control, understanding medical, health and human services, education, transportation, and within all of those, HR systems. If you can name something that happens in regular industry, in private sector, it's probably happening in the government space. I've even done some things where we did comparisons of cruise lines with battleships because we were looking at edge devices, cloud edge devices. So there are a lot of parallels in terms of the different types of use cases. What's dramatically different is that the way that they go about acquiring software. We don't always say that the government is building software because they don't have huge industry or they don't have huge houses, huge factories where they do this kind of stuff. Now, I say that, and I'll come back to it, and we'll double click into talking about what are called software factories in defense. But in general, the government partners with industry. They tell industry what they want, and industry shows up. It could be that they bring the package and say, here it is. We finished it for you. This is what you wanted. It could be really tightly knit so that they're having this beautiful feedback loops and the government is acting on behalf of the end user. Could be that. That's one extreme. The other extreme is that the government has some places where they have software factories that are oftentimes staffed with a combination of industry and what we call government civilians. Heck, in the government space, in the DoD space, we even have soldiers, we have sailors, we have airmen, corpsmen, who are also helping to design, develop, and deliver software. So it's a universe. It's all over the map. But imagine how complex that makes it if the money that the government spends was identified and allocated in their budget a couple of years ago. So the money that's getting spent
Hmm.
today, the really cool new technology that we need right now, they decided on it 2 or 3 years ago. So how do you pivot and change when all of those things happen? And how do you make sure that the government is never competing with industry? Well, gosh, that opens up a whole lot of interesting, well, I
Hmm.
guess a can of worms it does, because you don't want to compete with industry, but sometimes industry doesn't have what the government needs yet. And that's where the government has its own labs. That's where places like MITRE, and I'm speaking on my own point of view. I'm not representing MITRE. Today is my opinion on behalf of what I've experienced throughout my career, including with MITRE. But these different organizations each have to come at it a different way. Imagine that you don't want to know any of the details. You just need software fast. How you ask for it, how it is built, and how it is delivered to you. You probably don't care about the developer experience that same way. You probably don't care about agility.
Hmm.
Maybe you do, maybe you don't. What you might care about is how frequently can you get a change into production. That might be the only thing that you care about. And as long as they say, we can do that for you, that's fine. It's behind a curtain. On the other hand, you might have a very blended and embedded team, and you want to make sure that you understand the measures and the metrics. How are they performing? Not just the humans, but how is the software performing, right? Getting all of those modern software practices, applying DevSecOps principles, and then all of the goodness that brings. It's huge. It's huge. So suffice it to say, depends on where you go in the government. And I have the luxury of being very horizontal. Some days I'm over here dealing with the DoD. Other days I'm over here hanging out with the IRS and Treasury. It just depends on the day and depends on where the need is.
Wow. Amazing. And of course, like this is, I feel like we're still scratching the surface and there is so many different parts of the government which are harder to get into. But I think you did touch up on a little bit of topic, which I think is interesting. So you talked about software factories and you talked about how government works with industries. So is it safe to, or like fair to say that developer experience really applies to, like, for instance, you were talking about delivery. So it applies to deliveries from those software factories. And
Mm-hmm.
when they work with the industries, it's a little bit more like soft-handed in the sense that you just expect industry to follow the best practices, but their focus on developer experience could be on their own software factories.
Exactly. It depends on how much you're outsourcing to industry and how much you're partnering with them. And you really can think about this like building your own new home. If you want to have something very simple, you want a tiny home and you have an idea for it, and you just want it delivered, you want it rolled in and delivered, that's one thing. But if you have a background or if you have staff that understand what it's going to take and you want a 3-story structure and you want it to be brick over stick and you want that kind of construction, you want to be there, well, then you may partner very differently. You may come by and talk to the foreman every day. And so it's going to vary, and that developer experience is going to go along with that. So in cases where, well, let me back up. Developer experience always matters. It always matters because in order to get quality software, in order to help those people who are the hands-on keyboard, you need to provide right, efficiency, effectiveness, self-help, right? You need to be concerned about all of those things, cognitive overload, right? Messaging and feedback. That's always important, but it's how much of it that the government sees and that the government knows that they're directly paying for or indirectly paying for. So if they have the software factory and they have people sitting side by side, it's a more obvious cost because they're paying to enable that. They have folks who are focused on the developer experience and building out the developer experience and then tracking that to the downstream impact of awesome software that's being delivered, right? So you're going to hear me say again and again as we talk today, it depends. It
Right.
depends. It is a spectrum with nuance. It's like walking into a library, right? No two books are the
Right.
same.
Right. So I'm not going to necessarily sugarcoat this, right? When we think about government tech, we think about like legacy systems, outdated tech stack.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that is that true picture of government? And like in some ways, I also understand if you're saying the technology planning typically takes like 2 years to even go from deciding to work on it to actually like start working on it. Tell us a little bit about like how uh, government stays up to date on some of these technologies, and share a bit
Okay.
more about working in that versus private sector, how different it would be.
Gosh. So the first thing that I'll say is that government moves at the pace which it can. In some instances, it is massively nimble and fast. If you think about working to put up a new satellite and dealing with something in when there's a conflict, something of national concern, that is a little bit different than something that would be less, I don't want to say less impactful, but they're the different imperatives. And the different imperative definitely makes a difference to it. Your question on, is there really a lot of old software? Well, does private industry have a lot of old software? Yes, it does. And I can prove it because I still work with private industry. I still
Yes.
talk with folks all the time. So it's no different. There are decades of technologies. And as they've moved forward, they try to, industry or government tries to move forward to modernize. And sometimes we fail because we say we're going to modernize as though it's a once and done thing. Now we talk about
Hmm.
continuous modernization, right? Continuously evolving. But in the government space and in the private industry space, you went to migrate from technology one to technology two, but there was some reason that you had to keep something online. And then you kept
Hmm.
moving, and the next decade, the next big thing came in. Could have been driven by funding, could have been driven by grants, could have been driven by a technical challenge. Who knows why? But that is no different. It's just that we get a much worse rap in the government space. Because in the government space, what we expect as taxpayers is I want the government to be the best of the best of the best. I don't want them to be the same as the average healthcare provider. I don't want them to be the same as the average bank that has COBOL as well as cutting edge, right? I don't want them to be the same. I want them to be better. Um, so, yes, there are decades of technologies. And when I mentioned that it can take years, it isn't necessarily always years from idea to final delivery. It's more around the budgeting for it.
Hmm.
The way the government budgets is multiple years out. There are some budgets that are out there that are looking 10 years out. So what do I put out there? What new, especially if I'm thinking about incorporating some of the newer AI technologies on behalf of the end user? How I didn't know about that 2.5 years ago when I put that budget together. So we put in that we're going to do X, Y, or Z. How we do it sometimes dramatically impacts the price tag. So we have to look for different funding in different ways. Now, the same thing does happen in the private sector, and it depends on the type of
Right.
corporation it is. If they have pockets that are deep enough to allow them to pivot, to allow them to work at risk sometimes because they're doing something that's leading edge, but they don't necessarily have a final purchase for it. They don't have somebody they're selling it to yet. So everything I'm saying to you, I know you're going, yeah, that makes sense. It's it's different, but it's not that different. It's
Right.
just it's size. It's the massive size of it all. Now, I'll
Right.
say one
Right.
other thing that I do believe is very different, and that is in many of the government spaces, the time that somebody's associated to a program is not that long. So,
Hmm.
especially if I look at Department of Defense, you may have somebody who is in the military who's not a civilian, they are actually military. So their time assigned to a role is 2 years. So if they're coming in as the
Right.
leader and setting that direction, I jokingly call it MTTCC, mean time to command change. Things evolve and change because that person comes
Right.
in, they get their bearings, they want to exercise change, they want to make those changes, everything starts to get going. And then about 18 months into it, they're starting to throttle down because they're looking at the next place where they have to go to. So the government right
Hmm.
now is working on career paths that allow people to have longer lived teams. That is going to be amazing. The Army in particular is doing some stuff with that right now. That's going to allow us to, Well, it's going to help us to, when you are a government employee, when you are military or you are a government civilian, that's going to help you be a little bit more like industry, because we can have long lived teams in industry, right?
Right.
We don't get we don't
Right.
have the same luxury in the government space
Interesting.
all the time.
Yeah. Although in Silicon Valley, I would say an average tenure is also about 6 months these days for
Well,
employees.
yeah. Well, there's that. There's that. But it's sometimes it's something that people
Yeah.
choose. For a long time, it was
Right.
something that people choose. Right now, I think it's just messy. We're just living in a very
Yes.
messy time.
Right.
That's all I got. It's messy.
Right. I'll come to like some of that like AI topics and the evolution as well. Maybe one thing to discuss, and probably also goes into you how I was talking about, like, maybe one of the reasons why also government tends to move slightly slower compared to industry is also because of they cannot afford to have errors, or kind of like cannot afford to have like take risks, right? In some ways you have an aspect of compliance, like, if you're building a tax software, you cannot have bugs in it, which I can imagine many are like, organizations when they're working in private industry can have like some of that luxury, especially in startups.
So it depends. It goes back to the type of software that we're dealing with. One of the things that we do want is we want there to be early experimentation. We do want it to be rapid. I like to say learn fast, but some people will say fail fast, right? That's what we say in DevOps. We say you're going to fail fast so you can move forward more quickly.
Hmm.
Um, that's not always different. The government is risk adverse, which they should be. They should be adverse to risk, and it depends on the area of the government. But sometimes there is such an aversion to risk that they don't want to fail at all. And that's
Hmm.
grown up. That has grown up over decades. It isn't as though it just started yesterday. And it grew up with this need to have requirements that took 1, 2, 3. I was on projects earlier in my career where it took 2 years to gather the requirements. Huh? And so that has dramatically changed, and that is changing. So there are so many different explanations for what has happened. Yeah, I could keep going down this path, but let me pause and see what other questions that you have, Ankit.
uh, I think I would want to at least talk a bit about how developer experience or work of developer itself is changing, and maybe we can switch gears there a little bit.
Sure.
So even every software engineer today is worried, like, am I going to have a job next year? Am I going to have a job in 5 years? And I
Hmm.
think I'm guessing government would be no different too. So what are you seeing kind of like evolution of this in the like government sector and also like generally, but also
Hmm.
I'm curious, especially if you're thinking about if government is planning 2 years ahead in terms of budgeting, how does that evolve with the industry, which I feel like I'm struggling to keep up on a week by week basis?
So the budgeting piece is being dealt with. There's a lot of really good, smart people who are acquisition experts, modular contracting experts. So I don't worry about that as much. They are helping us to use different types of, they're called transaction authorities, different types of approaches, different types of policy. That's being solved. And the current administration, love them or hate them, they're doing things that are amplifying that to move things forward more quickly. So thumbs up
Hmm.
for that. But let's talk about being a developer. Let's talk about being a software engineer, which I consider to be different. Let's talk about
Hmm.
being a software architect or anybody else associated to the end-to-end value stream. Until, oh gosh, until I guess 2022, we are getting better and better at optimizing our methodologies to help humans. Think about it. Why do we have agile the way that we do? Why are we concerned about cognitive overload and work in progress? We've optimized for humans because it's a bad thing? No, we've done that so we can help humans be as effective as possible. So all of a sudden, people are talking about AI. Now, when people generally talk about AI, they're talking about generative AI because we've been using the
Hmm.
bigger umbrella of all different types of AI and machine learning and all kinds of algorithms for decades. So it's already been here for a long time, but it's the generative AI that suddenly is available to everybody. right? You go into the
Hmm.
grocery store and somebody's talking about it there. You go into the bank and the bank like everybody, the whole world knows about it. But that means it also infuses our jobs differently. Up until very recently, it has been added to our individual tasks. So I'm doing some requirements work. I'll leverage a generative AI tool, whether I just use
Hmm.
ChatGPT in my business, whether I used my own private model. I'm doing my requirements. And then it flows down the next path, right? But we're doing everything the same way. And we're still doing it that way even today, even today. But I'm cautioning because it's going to change. It's changing. It's going to be dramatically different in 6 months than it is today. Every uh, task in the software development lifecycle is still owned by the same human right now. We're starting to
Hmm.
see agentics being brought in. And at first, it's a pair programmer kind of a mentality. What we're going to be seeing, though, is that the SDLC and how it operates, how it's been optimized, is going to be rejiggered entirely for AI, teams of AI agents. So we're not going to be slinging as many front end pages. We're not going to be writing as much React code ourselves. Those things that we can delegate, we will delegate. It's happening now. It's happening right now. It's happening right now. So what do you do? What do you do? If you're a software developer, figure out what you want to do with your career. Do you want to continue being hands-on? If so, you better learn software engineering, which means that you need to get some additional education. There are a lot of amazing, I call them hobbyists, meaning somebody who grew up close to technology but didn't have to have an advanced degree. And they were able to be a developer and they were able to have a very profitable, very engaging career, but they didn't need to have that additional level of education, that additional level of exposure. We're going to be moving towards all being software engineers. And our job is going to be that digital platform where all of those AI agents and orchestration of those agents, the addition of machine learning algorithms, of other algorithms, we're going to be working with the data scientists to make that really complex thing become a reality so that you can walk up to it or I can walk up to it and I can explain in natural language what I'm looking for. And then I can expect for the AI system, the solution, the AI team, that digital platform, I can expect that digital platform to be able to accomplish those things that we need in order to provide software into production. And it's also going to be watching what's happening in production. So right now it's a tool, single tool, or a single tool different used by different individuals. It's not under the same umbrella from end to end. It doesn't have memory across everything that you do. But as we bring all these things together, we're going to see it kind of under the same umbrella. Think of it like having a big user session that everybody related to the software development lifecycle is plugged into that, and all of the AI technologies, plural, are plugged into them. So, yeah, it's going to be a whole lot different. That means that developer experience changes, and it means that we focus on the applying developer experience to software engineers. It also means we
Hmm.
need to be even more focused on humans in the loop and what's called humans on the loop, and what's it like for them to interact with whatever we're doing. So take all of the amazing things that we've learned over the last couple of years, take DevRel and apply it on behalf of advocating for whoever's interacting with these digital platforms. So there you go.
Very
Did you expect all
interesting.
that? That's a lot. That's a lot. And it's
That's a lot.
broad and tall and it's deep.
I do want to like. There's a lot of different topics within that I want to cover, but like you did mention human on the loop versus human in the loop.
Mhm,
I've never
mhm.
heard of that term before. Do you want to
Ah,
describe more what human on the loop is?
sure. Human in the loop right now is that the human is using the tool and ultimately owns exactly what comes out of the tool. So take the example that we all know of, which is code generation or code completion. When I'm leveraging that,
Hmm.
it's in my browser and then I own it. I'm the
Hmm.
human in the loop. I have responsibility for the quality of it, for any tests that are written against it, for what happens downstream. I'm responsible for it. So I'm a human in the loop.
Hmm.
After a while, after our ability to trust, and there's a concept called calibrated trust, but it means human machines have a trust relationship with each other. Long story, but a good one. As more trust is built up, I don't need to be in the loop in the same way. Instead, I am on the loop. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for where there are opportunities, necessary opportunities where I must get involved, as opposed to being in the way as a phase gate or as a stopping point. So humans on the loop will be observing. There is the safety net, maybe almost like the physical kill switch, got to turn the lights on or turn the lights off. We need to stop something, make sure that it doesn't progress forward, but it will not need to be nearly as frequently. So we're calling that humans on the loop instead of humans in the loop.
Interesting. Okay. I would have to at least, like, maybe related, have to ask you about your predictions for how does this going to play out in government space?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's going to be similar in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that the adoption
Mm-hmm.
would be somewhat similar? I would imagine there is going to be more supervision. Like, we don't want, like, AI to take over all the government software and technology.
Well,
So there is that risk as well. But, like, I'm also curious, like, if you were to predict how stuff, well, I mean, I think years are also, like, these days getting shorter and shorter in terms of how quickly things are changing. But if you were to predict in, like, the next few years how
so
things are
Bannon's
going to look
prediction.
like in terms of adoption.
Bannon's prediction is that we see an increase in government adoption of private sector technologies and approaches. That's what they've wanted all along, but there have been challenges and hurdles in policy, in funding, lots of different challenges in the way. Working to break those things down because we have to.
Hmm.
We have to. So unless we all want to learn to speak Mandarin or some other language, right? We know that we have peer adversaries who are working really quickly and they're not what's hamstrung by the same policy issues that we have. At the same time, we've got a lot of folks who are making sure that we don't step on any unnecessary landmines, right? We have to be really careful. So will government adopt the same types of things? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And sometimes, some places they already have. In some places, it's going to lag. It's not going to be any different than if you think about almost every different domain. If you are in medical research, if you are creating medical devices, right, you are highly advanced with what you're doing with AI and all of these technologies. So, yeah, each industry is a little bit different. Each government area is a little bit different, but definitely. But I'm not worried about us suddenly being taken over by an automated big brother. I'm more concerned about our own First Amendment rights than I am from that perspective. So data privacy is still a thing.
Okay, so yeah, Tracy, thank you. Maybe one last question here would be for folks who are in the industry and looking to kind of like work with the government. Do you have any suggestions, or do you see kind of like how this private government partnership is evolving?
Yeah, that one's there are full hour sessions that are going on right now where people are helping. So I want to kind of stay away from that as a direct topic. The bottom line
I
is,
see.
if people have a passion for technology, government sector is a great place to be. It's
Mhm.
not hundreds of years behind. It's not even decades behind. It works at a different pace, but it also impacts at a different scale. So I would say that people should not be afraid. There are many people who are driven by the mission as well. There's something to be said about really helping your fellow citizens, about really helping national security, about really helping other people.
All right. So with that, thank you so much, Tracy. This was really fun. Great chatting with you, learning a lot about like how government works, how AI is
Well,
evolving,
hopefully
and I
it's
look
something
forward to
interesting to
you
your
know
listeners. Hopefully they enjoy it as well.